Happy quilting weekend. This is Ann here from My Paper Ninja, and we're going to work through the Ice Crystals paper pieced pattern today. It is a pattern by Toby Lischko and part of the National Quilters Circle mystery quilt challenge that we're doing right now. So the first thing you're going to do is print off the pattern, and you're going to want to know if it's been printed to the right size. In this block, the directions say that it should be a 6.5 inch finished block. So if you measure from side to side, it should be 6.5 inches, or from this point to this point should be 6 inches finished. The other side you could measure is this side number 3. Should be 6 inches from point to point, which it is, or 6.5 to the dotted lines. So that's a good way to check and make sure you printed to the right size. Next, you're going to take your paper scissors, which we know it's a big no-no to use quilting scissors on paper, and you're going to cut along the dotted outside line. So you're just going to cut, cut, cut. And I already did that here, so that's what this one is. So after that's cut, the next thing you're going to do is draw the lines that are in between. And so that is the lines between 1 and 2, that's this line here, and 2 and 3. And you're going to do that on the back side, so it'll help you to see better. The easiest way to do that is to use a light box or a window if it's bright enough outside. You're just going to line up a pencil, and you always want to use pencil because pen, if it bleeds into your fabric, will not come off. If this pencil gets on your fabric by accident somehow, it will wash off. So just the lines between pieces 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 are drawn. The next thing you'll do is fold on those lines. So now you can see the line, you're going to fold it towards you. You can either use a bone folder or your fingernail to get a nice sharp crease. Open that up and do the same thing between the other two. This will make it much easier when you're sewing later if you've pre-done that step. All right, so let's cut the fabric for the block that has reverse. So it's AR, BR, and CR. So these are the 3 pieces I cut out. This is my template, but it does not have the seam allowance. You can see 1 is in light color and 2 are in dark. So I'm going to cut these from my dark fat quarter, which is this right here. And this is solid, so it's the same on both sides. If yours is print, you want to put your print side facing down when you're cutting this. All right, so you're just going to line them up on your fabric. And because there's no seam allowance, I prefer to do about a 1/2 inch when paper piecing, so I have enough to play with. So I'm just going to add a 1/2 inch and add a 1/2 inch. So there's piece CR. You need AR, which will fit right in here nicely. And just 1 more 1/2 inch. And let's just cut this little piece off the bottom so it's as easy to see as possible what the shape is. So there's AR. The next one to cut is BR, and that's going to be out of my solid, which happens to be a gray. So just going to line that up. Watch the selvage at the bottom. Doing about 1/2 inch. You can eyeball it on this side. Oops, put that back. And do the top. So there are the pattern pieces. So it's going to go AR, BR, CR. So next step is sewing. We're going to sew through this template paper piece here on the lines, and we're going to follow the numbers in order to paper piece. So 1 is our starting piece. That's this one, CR. And we're going to attach this piece to that one using a little bit of fabric glue. Yep, glue stick is going to attach it, and it will wash out later. So that way you don't have to pin. It's much faster. So just stick that down. The next piece you're going to need is BR, which is number 2. So that's this here. But in order for it to attach, when this flips down, it's upside down. So you're going to flip it upside down. And then you're going to place this piece over so that this triangle right here, which is why we drew those lines, is going to fit onto that piece of fabric. So you can line it up. If you have your light box out, you can use that. You can eyeball it, or you can pinch. So if you pinch right here and then flip over, you can see that that's going to be covered. This corner here is going to be covered, and this corner here is going to be covered. You're just going to put this into the machine, holding those layers tight. Flip the paper down so you can sew on the line between 1 and 2, starting at that first point here. Now this is a good time to remind you that in order to prep for this, you should have your machine clean and ready to go, a new needle put in for a new project. You should have appropriate thread and a presser foot, and you're going to then set your stitch length below 2. So I like to do mine at 1.6. You're just going to line it up. Some people do a couple stitches to anchor. Some people just sew straight ahead. Up to you. Sew straight on that line between 1 and 2. Lift your presser foot, pull it out, snip. And snip off those extra pieces so they're out of the way. Now the next thing you're going to do is see if you did it right. So flip it over, push that fabric, and see if it covers the line that you drew for piece 2. So I do not see that line. That means it's covered. So the next thing to do is cut off this extra piece. You can see there's a lot of extra fabric. So you're going to set that down. Here's your 1/4 inch ruler. Line up the 1/4 inch line with the edge of the paper. And then rotary cut that right off. So now that that's pressed, you're going to move on to the piece 3 that attaches to piece 2. So when you fold piece 3 back, it flips over. So you're going to flip your piece over. And then you're going to line up this piece onto that piece, so the shape should line up. So you can see this edge needs to be within those borders. And then this long skinny point needs to land in that spot as well. Works well if you hold it up to the light or put it over a light box, or you can always pinch and check. So once that's lined up, take it to the sewing machine, flip the paper back, and sew on the line between 2 and 3 from point to point, or you can go slightly over. I like to drop the needle in that first point between 2 and 3 so I know I'm exact. Remember, your stitch length should be less than 2. This means that all of your stitches will be close enough together that it perforates the paper. And when that paper is perforated well, it means it's easier to rip it off. I like to do a couple back stitches. You don't have to. Remove that from the machine. Cut off the extra thread. Let's get those templates out of the way. All right, let's see if this worked. When this flips back, you should not see the green paper. No green paper. That's iron. Whoop, not iron. Let's cut that extra off first. So, fold that back. put the ruler on. Cut to 1/4 inch. Now let's press this part open. Now you have a beautiful piece, and we need to cut the extra pieces off. So in order to do that, you're just going to use your ruler and your rotary cutter, and you're not going to cut through the paper, you are just going to cut the fabric. So set the ruler just barely over the line where the paper ends. Trim that off. And you might ask why? Well, that paper is going to dull your rotary blade really fast. We want those rotary blades to last as long as possible. So this will help your rotary blade last longer. Okay. And then there's a couple little funny corners they want us to cut off. So we will cut those off. And the last one. Voila! Reverse side is done. The last step today is to attach pieces with A, B, and C to AR, BR, CR. So we've already done the paper piecing and trimmed the fabric to the paper size. The last thing is to attach the regular to the reverse, fabric sides together, and then this is where pins are really handy. So if you grab a couple pins, you can hit some key points. So these points right here are ones I would really like to match up in the quilt. So if you pin through that intersection, and then pin through this intersection, make a pivot point. So you just hold that there while you line everything else up. So the next one you can line up is over here. So you stick the pin through this point and the fabric, and then on the other side, that point and the fabric, make another pivot point. If you line those up, you should be able to stick a pin anywhere on this line. It should go through the line on the other side, and it is lined up. Grab another pin, pin right next to that pivot point, pin next to this pivot point, and then you can grab the pivot point to make this last one. Make sure it all lines up. So, not normally a big fan of pinning, but when you're doing very exact paper piecing and you like your points to meet, which I do, it's a good reason to actually pin. All right, so now those hit. Pull that taut and stick one more pin through. So this pin should hit both lines. It did. You can pull the pivot point out. All right, so the last thing to do is to sew along this long line from the back corner of CR through piece 1 to the short side of 3 or AR to this corner here. So put it in the machine, drop the needle into that corner, stitch back a couple. Now it's really important to remove your pins and not sew over them. Some people will tell you that you should just sew over your pins. The newer machines out are not made to go over pins. If you do, you can either break a needle or worse, throw off the timing of your machine. If you do that, you will need to buy a new machine or have yours serviced. So stop, remove your pin, keep going. Stop, remove a pin, and finish that line. Back stitch a couple. All right. Cut that off. Trim off the other side. So it's pretty close. When we open it, it should have beautiful points. It does. So that means we are done sewing. The last thing is to remove the paper. I hear if you have children or grandchildren that they are fantastic at doing this. I don't have any of those, so I get to remove the paper. You can see a little bit of the glue residue. I don't have to worry. That'll come off in the wash. Quilting's supposed to be fun, so don't stress over it. Give it a try. Maybe you'll love it, or maybe you'll say, hey, something I tried, and move on. So I say we all work hard. Make sure that your free time is doing something fun that you enjoy. I happen to enjoy paper piecing. Hopefully now that you have a better understanding of what it is, you'll enjoy it too. Makes very precise corners and lines, and you can do very detailed designs that would be very difficult to do if you were solely cutting pieces and sewing them together without that foundation of paper. The final thing to do is iron this. I normally iron to the dark side, but there's a lot of points right here, so I am going to iron that open. You're almost done. You've just paper pieced the two halves, sewn them together, and pressed them. The last thing to do is to make sure that you have square blocks, because you'll need to sew them together, so you want them to actually be square. Now, since you had your two sides, they should measure 6.5 by 6.5 on the ruler. If they don't, you could always line up that center line with that center line on your ruler and trim off any extra. On two sides, flip it, do the same, trim it. So you want the block to be exactly 6.5 by 6.5. You'll then be able to go ahead and assemble 1 to 2, 3 to 4, and then top to bottom. Happy quilting!